Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about how to create a web app for the Microsoft Azure portal and how you can define the access policies. In my previous video, we have covered how to onboard your Azure AD workspace. So if I click on the first step, onboard your cloud workspace, so you can see CM dashboard is going to open up. It will take a couple of seconds. So now if I go to settings, platform management. So here you can see my entire Azure AD directory has been onboarded, including my Azure management groups, which comprises of 3 different subscriptions for 3 different OUs. So now we are going to create a web application. So if I click on a web application, so you will see identity administration portal is going to open up. So we are going to add a web application. So here I'm going to search it with Azure. And we are going to select the second one, Microsoft Azure portal, WS Fed and provisioning. I'm going to click add. Then I'm going to click on a close button. So here we will be leveraging upon a token-based authentication. So for the token-based authentication, what we have to do, we have to go to the Microsoft Azure portal and create a new application registration. So I'm going to go to Azure AD, going to go to app registration. Then we are going to create a new app. So I'm going to name this app as SCA Azure Webapp. We're going to register it. And let me note down my directory ID. So I'm gonna select token authentication. So this is my directory ID. And then I'm gonna note down my client ID or application ID. So as a last step, we have to go to the certificate and I'm going to create a client secret. Sorry, not certificate, client secret. So I'm going to note down the value here. And then we have to allow some of the permissions as well. For the permissions, I'm going to go to API permissions. And we will start selecting some of the permissions. So application permissions first. So here I'm going to select a directory. So we need a directory read all. And apart from that, we need permissions on the domain side as well. So this is one of the permission. Let me click on graph. So let me search it with a domain. In domain, you have to choose both the permission domain read all and domain read write all. So once you add these 2 permissions, then we have to add one more permission on the delegation side. So here we need a directory read all permissions. So directory read all permissions. So these are the few permissions required. So I'm going to grant a admin consent. And so that's pretty much about it on the configuration standpoint on the Microsoft Azure. I'm going to go to my identity administration. I'm going to save it. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time. So let's wait for a couple of seconds. So I'll pause the video for a couple of minutes here. So it took a couple of seconds to verify. And then once it is able to verify, you can see all the domain names as well registered to my Azure AD tenant. So after that, so in this particular case, we are not going to enable a federation because many times customer they're using Azure AD as their IDP and they don't want to redirect their users to CyberArk identity for the entire authentication. So I'm going to keep my Azure AD as my IDP itself. So then we have to enable a secure cloud access. So that's one of the settings. And then we have to enable a secure web session as well. So it takes around like 15 minutes for SWS to be enabled. So I'm going to press OK, and then we have to wait for some time. Apart from that, there is no need to enable the provisioning because I have already set up Azure AD connector onto my AD, and that's how all my identity are getting synchronized from AD to Azure AD. So we are not going to enable any kind of a provisioning as well. So last thing, what we have to do, we have to add a permissions. For the permissions, I'm going to add my AWS cloud. Okay, so I'm not, I forgot to create a Azure cloud as my AD group, but overall the concept is still going to be the same. So within my AWS cloud, these are the 4 different users I created. These users are already synchronized to Azure AD side. So I'll show this configuration to you guys. I'm going to click add. So, and then I'm going to click on save. So once I click on save, you can see status is deployed. And my secure cloud access and SWS is enabled. So we will go to my Active Directory first. So let me show you. So what are the groups I created here? So one of the group we are focusing upon is AWS Cloud. So if I click on AWS Cloud, you can see there are 3 different users present: AWS, AWS2, and AWS4. And if I go to Azure AD, so if I click on the users, so you are able to see all these users, AWS, AWS4, AWS2 are getting synchronized from on-prem AD. So then as a next step, what we will do, we will start creating a policy. So we are done with the step number 1 and step number 2. Now let's start defining access policies. So let me create a policy for Azure AD first. We are going to say SCA policy 1. So here you can do a restriction as well from what time to what time or from what date to what date you want this policy to be enabled. So once I click next, so here I'm going to select my Azure AD. So it is going to load all the roles present in my Azure AD. So for this one, I'm going to provide a Office Apps Administrator role. And we can define one more role as well. So let's take an example. So we can define Intune administrator, for example. I'm going to click on a select, next. So here on the identity, so I'm going to provide this, create this policy for 3 of these users, AWS, AWS2, and AWS4. I'm going to click on add to policy. So here, once you click on add to policy, you can see you can restrict the entire session length. You can select on what day this policy is going to be active, from what time to what time. So all these things can be done. So once you click on activate policy, so it will do a couple of internal checks with the CyberArk identity. And if everything looks okay, then the policy is going to be enabled. So let's wait for a couple of seconds. So now we can see policy is active. So then I'm going to create another policy for Azure. So again, the same drill. So here I'm going to select a workspace. So here you can see the management group. You can see all the subscriptions. So I'm going to assign the permissions, key vault administrator permission for Azure subscription 1 and for Azure for subscription number 3. So click on select, the next. We are going to add a identity. So I'm going to select all my 3 users again. Click on activate policy. So again, it is doing some internal checks. So now the policy looks to be activated. So let's wait for a couple of seconds. It is validating. I think we'll come back to this screen a little bit later. So let's log in into the portal.azure.com. Then I will show you by default. I'm logging as a AWS SE Solution Demo.com user. I'm going to skip all these things. So then by default, if I go to Azure AD, users, so you will see I will have no permissions at all. So I will click on AWS. If I click on assigned roles, so you'll see I have 0 permissions. If I click on Azure role assignments also, so you will see I don't have any permissions at all. So what I'll do, I'll simply sign out. And then we are going to go to identity user portal. So I have logged in using my AD credentials. So once I'm able to log in, so you can see there is a Azure tile. And so now the policy is already active. So I'm going to select on the Microsoft Azure tile. So it will take a couple of seconds. It will take around like 15 minutes for SWS to get activated. So what I'll do, I'll pause my video. We'll come back after 15 minutes and then we will try accessing the Azure portal again. It took almost 15 minutes for SWS to get activated. So let's try to click on Microsoft Azure portal app. So here we can see there are 2 different protections are enabled. The first one is the step recording. Second one is the session protection. I'll simply click on a continue button. So here you can see, so I can see my directory. So there are two different roles has been assigned: Office App Administrator and Intune Administrator. When it comes to the Azure resources, you can see there are two different subscriptions I see where I can access the Key Vault role. So what I'll do, so let's select one of the Azure subscription 1. Let's click on a connect button. So here I have to log in again because we didn't enable any federation. So I'm going to log in as a AWS user. I'll simply ignore this one. So now you can see we are accessing the Microsoft Azure console. So I'm going to click on Azure AD. Let's see what are the roles has been assigned for this particular user. I'm going to go to the users. We are going to select my AWS user. I'm going to go to the Azure role assignment. So here you can see for Azure subscription 1, Key Vault Administrator role has been assigned. So I shouldn't see any other subscriptions at all. So I'm going to go back. So we are going to see if you want to elevate your permission to any of the Azure AD roles, how you can do that. The same drill, you're going to click on a Microsoft Azure tile, click on continue button. So here, so instead of the Azure resources, I'm going to click on a directory, going to click on a select. So I'm going to add myself into the Office Apps Administrator role, going to click on a connect button. It will redirect me to Azure console again. So I'm going to say ask later, going to log in as a AWS user. So here we are in the Azure portal again. Again, the SWS step recording is enabled. Gonna go to Azure AD. And then we are gonna go to the roles. So I think I will go to the users. From the users, I'm going to select my user. Then I'm going to click on assigned roles. So here you can see the Office Apps Administrator role has been assigned. Again, this role has been assigned as per your session duration setting. Once your session duration expires, so then this role or these permissions will be automatically taken away and user will move on to the zero standing permission. So we can perform a couple of additional steps. Then I want to show you guys how does the session recording is going to look like. So I'm going to go to my identity administration. We are going to click on a secure web session. So here I'm going to click on this session recordings. I have to use my CyberArk mobile app to unlock the recordings. So here you can see this session started 2 minutes back. So once I click on this particular session, you can see all the different details about this one is a AWS user, what exactly user was doing, what all steps user was performing. I click on a roles and administrator. So you can see pretty much like all the actions performed by the user. So thanks a lot everyone for watching this video. In the next video, we will look into how does the ad hoc access will looks like and how does the CLI based access is going to look like. So thanks again.